No, easements are part of an acquisition plan. If I can get that argument to stick with my own county attorney, then we don't have to go through the referendum process. But at the moment, we said, well, what can we do? He says, you're going to need to change your referendum.
Wow. Well, Charlie, let's officially kick this thing off and then we can really
Okay.
dive into it. So first of all, apologies to everybody for the last minute cancellation for the in-person. We had to do it on Zoom due to the holiday and a change of speaker and all that kind of stuff. It just it needed to be on Zoom. So the good news is we can record this and publish it on YouTube for our whole membership. But this is our January meeting of the Serenoa chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. And tonight, our speaker is Charlie Hunsicker, who is the Director of Natural Resources for Manatee County, along with his assistant Kendall Carson, who will be working the PowerPoint presentation as well. And Charlie, I got to admit, I've never met you in person, but I've heard your name so many times at various environmental things I've been to and from people, and I only hear good things. I'll let you kind of introduce yourself with your resume and all that, but I do know that you have, I think it's 50 years of experience working in Manatee County, specifically
It's
around these
it
environmental
gets longer
initiatives.
every time. No.
Yeah.
Well, but thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the group tonight. And I want to thank Kendall also for her assistance here. We're both teamed up. I began working with Manatee County in 1977. I took a 3-year hiatus to go to Pinellas County for a while, but came back right after that. So I guess I could say I've had 45 years working here with Manatee County, Florida. And through those times, I've been in the right places in the right times to be involved with a comprehensive planning process. I've been involved with the writing of our mining ordinance, and now it's enforcement. Served for a while as assistant director of our public works department and utility systems. And but in the last 24 years, have focused really about what it takes to build environments and maintain them and serve kind of like the national park representative for Manatee County residents. When people say, what is the natural resources program all about? Apart from our regulatory activities with air and water and phosphate mining, I'd like to say that we operate like the National Park Service does, with visitor services in the lands that are acquired. We work for acquisitions to expand upon the protections we have. We have 30,000 acres of lands under conservation, under Manatee County ownership, and are working each year to maintain, enhance, and protect those resources. And now with voter approvals from 4 years ago, we're now on a path to acquire more from willing sellers out there in the environment. So our program is very robust. We have the support of our county administration and the support of our board of county commissioners to do what we're doing and do more. So it's an exciting pathway. But I can go now into our PowerPoint to carry that, and then open it up. And if there are questions that come along the way, someone raise a hand or jump in. I don't mind that interruption. But and this is a classic problem. Ever had the slideshow? Someone would come in with a slide tray, set it on that machine, and you'd look from the audience, you'd see about 40 slides. You say, oh my God, it's going to go on forever. Well, see, with these things, you don't know how many slides I have, right? But I can tell you it's only 10 slides. So just so bear with us. But so I want to talk about in Manatee County the acquisition process that we've done, and we've tried to mirror this over the successful programs not only in Florida but around the country, working with the resources of Trust for Public Lands, who gave us some advice and some very good advice from the areas around the state that said, at what time should you involve the public? At what time should you involve advisory committees and your board county commissioners for decisions? So you can see here how we've laid this out. We'll take a nomination from a project from anybody. It doesn't matter. They don't need to be the owner. They drive by something and say, man, that needs to be conserved. We ask them to do a little research and they put it in. Then our staff does a little desktop assessment. Well, is this a property that meets some of the criteria that we hold when we prioritize acquisitions and nominations? I'll go over that in just a minute. But if we do make that assessment and find that it has value, it continues. And then finally, we contact a willing seller. And before we make any further public declarations, we get to the seller first and say, or the person who owns the property, excuse me, and saying, we have a program here in Manatee County. Would you be interested in engaging with us about acquisition, protection, easement, a number of instruments? You know, your land has been nominated because others have felt it's of special value. What do you think? Now we'll get some folks to come back and say, here's what I think. I don't want to do it. And it's over very quickly. Other times we have somebody say, well, you know what are we talking about here? Let's go into a conversation. So we have that dialogue and we do a little on-site meeting with the owner. We go out to take a look at the property to validate what we might see from an aerial. We might discover there's a spring there or streams that are valuable and important. And we'll make that evaluation and come back with a full review and a written report. And at that moment, we'll take it to what we have an advisory committee here. It's called the Environmental Lands Management and Advisory Committee, LMAC. And they'll take these are board appointed citizens, volunteers, and are charged with helping us, the department, in identifying, prioritizing, and recommending for acquisition or easement lands under our new referendum, our new voter approved funding source for the program. LMAC then makes a recommendation. We get to work and the board is involved. We let them know, hey, your advisory committee took a look at this property and they're recommending it go forward. We kind of send that in a quick letter in case someone says, oh, no, wait a minute. That's not a property we want you to take a look at. We've got different plans for that property for transportation purpose or another public purpose. We can stop. But anyway, absent that, we keep going. We develop a plan. We do the due diligence. We make an appraisal, again, working with a ruling seller, hoping to come to an agreement in terms of that value, present it to the board, contract, and we're done. And that can be fee simple or easement. But we find this process to be transparent. It involves the owner up front, so there's no surprises. It doesn't call us back up and say, I've had some people tell me you want to buy my property and I tell you what you can do with that. We don't go with that. We try to avoid all of that because it's very important in many instances to work with an owner that's going to have to accept a lower value of land under our appraisal than their expectation. And it takes a lot of landowner love for their property, a lot of landowner desire to keep it in conservation as opposed to rooftops. It takes a lot of that understanding and back and forth, what I call kitchen table talk. Not just, here's our letter, we have threat of eminent domain. If you don't do it, we're going to buy this for a lift station or road widening. That's not the path we take in natural land acquisitions. So, okay, next slide. We have, obviously you have to make a judgment call on what are the better properties with limited funds. And so you can see here, each property is evaluated against these criteria. Now, our environmental lands program has been around since 2003. When we first thought we were going to get a sales tax voter approved behind us to give us funding, and we set about developing and getting prepared for that. But lo and behold, the sales tax failed. And so it was a setback for us. But at that time, we recognized, like other programs around the state, that the important plants and animals of Florida were important. If these properties had a lot of them, good. Little of them, not so good. Rarity of species of the ones that were there. Rare, good, not so much. Connectivity was important for us because we could build upon what we already had. The areas in dark green at 2003 and a little bit later represents the properties that have already been purchased for conservation and use. And so if we could attach and look for properties that were adjacent to or nearby, from the standpoint of a scrub jay flight path or a river corridor that could move plant or animal material from one location to another, that was going to be important. And then, of course, water resources has been the driving factor for us at all times. For us, drinking water resources and groundwater resources, we're blessed to have the ability to develop both here in Manatee County, surface water and groundwater. So when the referendum came through, we wanted to add a little bit more criteria, thinking, as it turned out to be true, we got a lot more properties to look at. Right now, I think there's almost 74 been nominated. 28 of those were returned from people who are saying, well, I'm interested, maybe. I'm not necessarily ready to sell right now, but what are you talking about? And we have yet to reach out to others. But so we have a good stable of properties to keep working from. And again, we use drinking water protection, water quality, stormwater runoff pollution, which was part of our referendum backing, uh, wildlife habitat, fish habitat, provision of parks. Those are the specific things called out in our referendum language that received, by the way, 72% of the voters voting. If every Democrat in Manatee County had voted, we still had 23% of the Republicans voting for this. So we were able to brag a little bit about the very bipartisan nature of land acquisition and stewardship. It's everyone's interest. Um, the other consideration down there is blank, but the last one that we would hold is, I would say, a threat of land use conversion. I don't want to say threat of development, like, oh, the developers are coming, but land use conversion for any particular reason. I'd even say, particularly from my standpoint, solar farms have become a large landowner, large use of lands. And they're not farms, actually. The last time I checked, they're not growing anything around the panels, or they're having any grazing going on. And so sometimes we even look at that. But our lands in the central part of the county, and certainly to the east, are over the long term going to be subject to development pressures, redevelopment, or land use conversion. And obviously the parcels closest to those threats, and some people would call them opportunities, not threats, closest to those opportunities are the ones that should have a higher priority over the ones that maybe are too much further east and maybe going to be visited upon in 10 or 20 years from now with development pressures or opportunities. So those are the kinds of other considerations we take into account too. Next slide. We do have a way in which the public can view these properties, and also a way in which we can quickly categorize them in accordance with those values of ecological values, functional wetlands, floodplains, rare species habitat. And we're able to score them utilizing FNA maps, lands from Fish and Wildlife Service and other criteria, talking about restoration values and the current zoning. Do they provide, how do they hit the criteria of drinking water protection or preservation habitat? Each property that we have from a willing seller appears in this publicly viewable candidate properties dashboard. And the value of this, and I credit this to Deborah Worth, our predecessor, this was set up through our GIS, that when we have a property that's nominated out of the blue, 500 acres somewhere in Manatee County, we can enter that parcel number at like about 5:30 in the evening and come back the next morning, and the computer has already ranked the whole property in accordance with all these criteria, percentages of value, the whole deal right there overnight. And so it's a real great tool, finally utilizing GIS to our advantages, and publicly viewable. Okay, next slide. So I mentioned following that chart of accounts, when a contract is made, the property is acquired, the property acquisition division gets us that earlier step of due diligence, working through the appraisals, the title work, and importantly, sitting down with the landowner, what I call the kitchen table conversation about coming to an agreement of price, either for fee or for easement. We follow up with providing the restoration and management plans, the cost estimates for such things, and trying to build budgets for that, and looking for grants from our partners to accomplish that when we need to. And then we implement, we build, we restore, and we maintain. Some of our partners include the Water Management Districts, as you can see here, Fish and Wildlife Service, Fish and Conservation Commission, sometimes even federal partners like NOAA and Interior. And for what's now become a very, very valuable tool in the last 3 years is the Florida Rural and Family Lands Program, which is designed to acquire easements from willing sellers, which, with the additional twist that those easements that are purchased by the state and managed by the state provide for perpetual agricultural uses of the land. That means forever. Through any sales to future owners, the agricultural values are maintained. Now, they can be different uses. You can go from forestry to range, or range back to forestry, or row cropping. But in these instances, from our standpoint, maintaining an agricultural presence is important to our county. We just went through a strategy session, a historic thing. For the first time in 20 years, our Board of County Commissioners have laid forward a series of strategies and implementation steps to get to those strategies. And one of the few things they agreed on initially was that we wanted to encourage, incentivize, and maintain as much as possible the agricultural heritage and uses in eastern Manatee County. We're quote unquote, we're growing fast enough. And let's see what we can do. And so the Rural and Family Lands Program comes in, and with easement efforts is one way to perpetually encourage and incentivize agriculture. A great partner for us. And of course, as you may know, there are other organizations here in the PowerPoint. Private nonprofits like the Manatee Fish and Game would help us with our referendums, our bondings. Trust for Public Lands is a big player here and throughout Florida. Our other groups, Mosaic, is a big landowner, which I'll talk about in a minute. The Florida Conservation Group, chambers, etc. So we don't do it alone, and we certainly need the help and the financial resources from time to time from all those organizations to do what we can. Okay, next slide. So we're on our way, right? The bonds were sold. $35 million worth of bonds were sold initially. We didn't want to bond the whole thing. We didn't need to pay interest on it. So we pulled down about $36 million for our first effort. And with that, we have acquired, you can see there, Emerson Point expansion, which is located on Lower Tampa Bay, which completed what we had was a hole in the donut. We surrounded a property of 96 acres with our existing Emerson Point Preserve that had been acquired by the state and managed by Manatee County. That acquisition went forward. We paid a dear price, $135,000 per acre, because there had been a 96 unit subdivision plan already presented to the Plan Building Services Department in a preliminary development acquisition. It was truly on the edge going to development, and our acquisition saved that. Likewise, Crooked River, a little bit further up the Manatee River, a little smaller property of about 120 acres, roughly speaking, that also came at a very dear price, about $140,000 an acre. But these two properties contributed to what I call our Manatee River corridor. With the acquisition of these and the properties that we already owned, Manatee County manages about 21 miles of Manatee River shoreline in public ownership to continue to protect that corridor for all the values it provides for wildlife movement, habitat, oyster recovery, and all the other things. There's been some other smaller properties there: Crane Park, North Pine Island, Cemetery Buffer expansion, and Triple Oak Preserve at I can't remember the acreage now, but that's the property you're going to be visiting on this Saturday. Again, all those properties to a T were acquired with the families agreeing to a lower value than they could have gotten on the private market. And now, as we look to the future, and that I'm going to say that encumbered about 22 million of the 35 million that we had. And now we look to the future with easements that are being considered by the Rural and Family Lands Program that we are participating in financially, and in general, these other properties with these goals in mind that are here on the slide. Okay, next slide. Impossible to read, but when you say, will you do? Yes, we have this January 2026 listing when the commissioners lean in and say, so, you got about 27 million. See it, look at my notes, I'm sorry. We have about 28 million. We sold the other $15 million of bonds just earlier this year. So we've now bonded out our $15 million purchasing power. And we have, look at this again so I don't misstate myself. We have $28 million unobligated at this moment. 28 million. And so we're actively looking at Anson Road at the top listed. That would be a purchase and fee, 550 acres, excuse me. That would be a hefty number, but we're very close with the owner in agreeing to what that price would be. Then Mossy Island, Thundercloud, and Taylor Ranches represent easements. Thundercloud there at 1,100 acres, Mossy Island at 437, Taylor Ranch a smaller easement, but 45 acres. I think that's a little understatement, might more like 100. But anyway, each of those through the Rural and Family Lands Program, we're our cash contributions for that 1,600 acres is probably 10 to 15 cents on the dollar of the total easement cost, and 3 to 4 cents on the dollar of a fee simple acquisition. But of course, these owners are not willing to sell in fee, but they are willing to accept that perpetual agricultural commitment, which is everything we need from a standpoint of protecting the important plants and animals of Florida with all of these initiatives. And we're an important animal too. We let public acquisition of these properties where we can. Easements don't normally allow public access, but we can't have it all, or we need to buy it in fee. So we have, as I mentioned, over 30,000 acres in ownership, and we'll start adding to our inventory, hopefully with more and more easements of this type. Because even though we have 28 million left, when coastal properties are going for over $100,000 an acre, and even interior properties are easily asking for $25,000 to $35,000 an acre, $50 million doesn't go very far. We also have, we look at a few community park needs. We're not blind to that purpose. And in some instances, we have owners. This Sweet Bay property is located off of Erie Road in Manatee County, up by not far down the road from Paris High School. It's an active nursery, and they're saying, as we get a little older here, we may be interested in tying up some of our property for easement and some of it later for a fee. And we'd be glad to have people, come take tours. So we're working with properties like that on a smaller scale. But there's 2,732 acres there in our near future under our program. So next slide, kind of wrap through. So there we are. There's a little scaling problem there, but you can see that with this PowerPoint we have, I even have to look at my notes because it's too small. The areas in green, of course, are the existing areas in conservation, both in Manatee and Sarasota County. The ones in yellow represent the properties that we have acquired in fee with our bond program. And the properties in pink or red are properties in progress. You can see the Thundercloud Ranch just below the Florida Power Reservoir, the Mossy Oak Ranch down there adjacent to and sharing two of its 4 boundaries with Myac River State Park. There was a 3.75 acre property down there that has Mossy Island Ranch Road on it. This is not that property, but it's on the market now for $3.75 million. Now if Mossy Oak is 533 acres, and they're selling for $37,000 an acre, you can imagine what that property is worth in fee. It would probably take up an entire bond capacity. We're participating with the state of Florida with a Manatee County share payment of $500,000. And the state is picking up the rest of the value of the easement. So you can see how local funds can be broadly leveraged to acquire large tracts of land for a nominal amount, but an important amount that locks that property in for perpetual agricultural uses forever. Big decision. The next slide and last slide kind of takes in a bigger picture, including the properties of adjacency. And these other considerations are such that we have to remember that we're not an isolated area. It doesn't stop at the county line. As your organization recognizes, you have members throughout. And there are two large initiatives here we always keep in mind. The Florida Corridor for Panther Habitat, which is a broad and strongly supported program by the state of Florida. We're on the we're on the western edge of that. And we often make that point in dealing with and talking to the Florida Forever people. Now, please come down, take a look at this property, walk it with us to see whether or not be eligible for indeed it's part of your corridor initiative. And then also, one of the larger landowners we have out there is Mosaic Phosphate. Now that tan shows their ownerships only in Manatee County. Obviously, they own in Hillsborough, Polk, Hardy, and DeSoto. And as a large landowner, they too are going to be instrumental in perpetuating our efforts to go after corridor connections, closing the gaps. They intend to enroll much of their properties in all 4 counties under what's called a Regional Habitat Conservation Plan, which is a federal initiative backed by the state of Florida to manage large landscapes for species that require that kind of acreage, from the scrub jay to the black bear and the panther, and to coordinate all of their land reclamations under that goal. I jumped ahead, Kendall. Let's jump back one slide if we can, because that same attitude, does it show up on this map? I don't see it. I guess I don't see it. We too try to make the corridor connections between the gaps here between color and aerial. And I might add, we did a little research, and this was backed up by Christine Johnson's own research with Big Waters. It says when you have a corridor target, a floodplain or a riverine corridor or a coastal corridor for that matter, from a plant and animal perspective, if you can capture at least 60% of the total land area of that corridor target, you have met the requirements of the plants and animals that need to move across those corridors. You don't have to own the whole thing. You can target and try to get at least 60% in your area, and it's usually enough to let animals move and plants to propagate by air or by water across those landscapes, even the private properties that intersect between them. You don't need them all. And so we have that goal in mind as well. But so let's take it to the last slide. I promise you it'll only be 10 questions, right? And here's Kendall's connection. Kara Koenig started today in this department as a successor to Deborah Worth's great works here in getting us this far along with our programming. Kara comes over from the Building and Development Services Department, where she managed the environmental planners in that section. So she has a working knowledge of Manatee County's environment, a working knowledge of our environmental challenges, and a solid understanding of what it takes to protect the important plants and animals of Florida. And that's been our goal all along. A lot of people would look at me from the earliest on saying, oh, you're natural resources, you're one of those tree hugger guys, and I don't know about you. And I said, look, I tell you what, our department, natural resources, we don't regulate environment, we build environment. And people would think about that for a minute. I'd see a little nod come forward. So that's been our lifelong mission. Many of us, been mine ever since Boy Scouts. I grew up in northern Wisconsin, Nicolet National Forest. If you've ever been up in that area around Lake Superior, beautiful territory. And that's where I went to high school, came down to Madison, then came down to Florida State for graduate school, took a job down here. And just like right out of the movie, It's a Wonderful Life, I'm still here. And I love it. That's our presentation.
That's great, Charlie. Thank you so much for doing this, especially last minute. Um, I'd like to take some questions from our members, so feel free to unmute yourself if you have questions. I had a few questions, but I guess I'll start with, could you tell me a bit about Rattlesnake Key? Because I feel like every 3 months I see an article that it's being conserved, and then I see an article that's being developed, and I'm just wondering what's going on there.
Well, there's a lot of folks who have signed confidentiality agreements. I only know what I believe. I'm not part of that, but I'm telling you this. I could talk about that for 15 minutes or 3 minutes. But Rattlesnake Key, as you know, was nominated back 30 years ago as part of the Terracea acquisitions. Emerson Point happened because of that. So the Terracea, the Water Management District, those were all included in a nomination package. We had an opportunity to buy it for $3 million back in 1984 when the Blaylock family owned it. The Water Management District was the negotiator. They said, we have an appraisal there for 1.5 million. We're not going to bargain against ourselves because we paid 3 million for that property. We'll just be looking at that higher value the next property we acquire. We're not going to do it. So that all fell apart. But they changed hands many times. And when it came up again, the state of Florida, it came kind of like a surprise to us. We had always identified it as an important property, but the legislature put in $23 million to acquire it and put it into the budget. Not 24 or not 22. Somebody came up with $23 million. And you go follow the money, it goes back to the ownership chain. Well, the state of Florida, DEP said, well, you know what? That no matter what money you give us, we're not going to pay that. They took the same posture. Our appraisals for this property is like $5 to $6 million, or seven, maybe eight, but certainly not that. And we're not going to move forward. I don't care what you tell us to do. Now, ironically, I'll tell this group that didn't happen this year in paying $22 million for the 4 acres in Destin, Florida. 23 million. Remember that land deal? It was a travesty. But nonetheless, it was the number one ranked property. And the governor said, well, it's number one. Legislature made it number one. We're going to proceed and we're going to buy it for, I don't know, 12 million an acre or whatever. But anyway, that didn't stop them then, but it stopped them 2 years ago to say, we're not paying that. So then it probably went away. Then the next year, Senator Boyd locally put in $7 million, not tied to the Florida Forever program. He said, look, I'm going to give you this funding, make it happen. So we thought to ourselves, we could take the seven, take about the 5 to 6 million appraisal we had, put that together, package it for 12 to 13 million. We'll try that. So we kind of ran that up the flagpole. Property owner came back and said, no, that's not, I'm not doing it. And so lo and behold, the property owner of the upland property rights that holds property rights to the property on either side of the Skyway Bridge also had an interest in Rattlesnake Key, and they formed a corporation in Connecticut, and 3 days later they bought it all. They bought the interest around the land around the Skyway, and they bought Rattlesnake Key 3 days later for whatever amount, and made the statement that we've been able to protect and preserve Rattlesnake Key forever, and that they're absolutely right. But now here's where Charlie's speculation enters in. Back in 1955, when the Beeline Ferry was running back between St. Petersburg and Manatee County, it broke down. And for 18 months, people had to drive all the way around Hillsborough to get there. They couldn't take it anymore. And they finally decided to resurrect some plans to build the Skyway Bridge. And it was push, push, push. Let's get it done in a hurry. And they bought the land, they started construction, cleared the ground. And the guy who owned the property from out of state showed up, said, you know what, I see what you're doing here on my land, but you see, you bought the property over there. You didn't buy my land. And I'm a little upset the fact you're building a major highway through my property without telling me. You owe me. And the state panicked. They said, oh my God, we're halfway through our construction, but working on land we don't own. And I saw the letter from the Secretary of the State typed with that phase between red and blue carbon that's used to have in really old papers, typed up, giving that property owner compensation for the land and bulkheading rights for the remainder of the property on either side of the Skyway toll booth to fill it in and for development in the future. Put a seawall up and fill it all in. bulkheading rights. Now, whether or not it's permittable or not, but that property held those bulkheading rights in perpetuity. So the corporation from Connecticut that formed 3 days later bought that property and the bulkheading rights. And the bulkheading rights serve you well if you're trying to build a cruise terminal for cruise ships that cannot get under the Skyway Bridge and have a lot of money behind them and are hoping to possibly make the transaction happen under this administration. And so when you're a property owner and you've got such a big impact behind you, what are you going to put out for offsetting mitigation? You donate Rattlesnake Key to the state of Florida because you own it. So I don't know. That could be a scenario. Other scenarios could be a hotel complex there. I mean, there have been polling of residents in Manatee County. Hey, what do you think about a resort complex, high density housing, cruise terminal? I remember one person said, "Well, do you have none of the above?" And the person said, "No, that's not an answer. Which of the four do you think we ought to have?" But so that's been going on. And so something's going on with that property, and it will be protected. And how its destiny in the future plays out, either by donation or just flat out protection, great. So that's the story. But there's a lot of stories around that property. But right now it's in private ownership and it's protected. If we were recording this again, I'd say that's my answer. All the other stuff is speculation, dream. You can tell it what it is.
Great. Go ahead, Bill. Yeah, if you guys have a question, just go ahead and unmute
Mr.
yourself and fire
Hunsicker,
away.
what's the projection or are the plans in place now for another citizen bond referendum? What are
Well,
we?
two things have happened. With $50 million, let's just say we're earning $9.5 million this year with a 0.015 millage. And the purpose of that millage is, first of all, to service the debt of the bonds that the county wants to sell. So servicing the debt on $50 million of bonds that we've now sold up to the limit of the called for runs about $4 million, which leaves us $6 million for restoration and maintenance. And those can be big numbers. And what the movement is, can we ask the public to increase our bonding allowance from 50 to 75 or 100? And we can do that without raising the millage or the tax. But they have to agree to that. Now, from our side, that's less funding for maintenance. And we don't want to get into the position of buying land for land banking purposes and not being able to maintain it or not let anybody on it. That sours the public opinion about, well, I don't understand what's going on. So that's the move. Or do we need to change the language of the referendum to add easements, for heaven's sakes, so we can spend the money for easements? Because we're tapped out now with this call for we did to be able to make Thundercloud and Mossy Island happen.
Thank you.
I'll finish that up. We've retained the Trust for Public Lands, who are going to do that voter research and the polling in the coming months to get the appetite from the folks. It's going to be a very schizophrenic. The ballot's going to have a bunch of stuff saying, here's how we're going to lower your taxes. Then there's another one that says, here's what we want to raise your taxes. That won't go. But if we can increase our bonding capability and convince folks we're not raising taxes to do that, that might be on the ballot. And if not, there's always 2028. Presidential election, even more people will show up. You'll get a better balance of electorate coming forward. I mean, so we're not, even if it doesn't happen in 2026, 2 years later, we can come back. We got 27 million to spend first, actually. But that'll be another topic for another day.
I had a question about the properties we acquired, especially the recent ones. Like, at what point after it's acquired does it become available to the public to use?
Yes. Well, walk on them right now. But what we're trying to do is bring in those elements of sanitary safety. You know, building a bathroom these days along the coastline, need to elevate it. You'd be shocked. $600,000-700,000 for the bathroom, and then the parking lot, and the trails, the kiosks, and the other improvements. So we go through a site plan process, a engineering design process, a permit process, and then a construction process. So it's usually, Robinson didn't come out of the ground for 4 years after we bought it, in terms of being able to provide information there. So the expectation should be 2 to 3 years after acquisition, we really start making improvements where you can kind of drive in, get out of your car, and walk around.
Charlie, this is Tom. I'll put my video on. I took a screenshot of your conservation and parks acquisition process slide,
Yes.
and that was, pretty succinct. My question is probably something you may not be able to answer is that process exactly the same for Sarasota, or are there any differences that you're aware of?
I think there's a little bit of difference because there's probably a little bit more involvement from their SLAP committee. But I do know that it's kind of like a runners in a race. It's about the same pace, but there could be little differences. Frankly, I can't speak to it because I haven't seen that.
No, I expected that.
But they do, for instance, they involve an advisory committee. They have a nomination process. They do the same willing seller check so they don't surprise anybody. And whether or not the commission plays a role earlier in the process or later in the process, I'm not sure. I think the county commission is asked up or down to buy it.
Right.
Let the committee and the committees and the research all the way through due diligence be done without, quote unquote, being involved. They put a lot more authority with their advisory committee to spend money to evaluate and make a recommendation. We interjected a touch point for the commission to say we're about ready to spend $30,000 on the due diligence for this property. Anybody got any problems before we go that way? And we'll get our feedback back.
Right.
Okay,
thank you.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Charlie, Claudia.
Yeah, I was going to read it. Go ahead.
Yeah, Claudia had a question in the chat that she asks, what are the current successes and challenges with Robinson's Preserve and Preco Preserve?
Well, the challenges was taking a farm field and turning it into a viable habitat, and then finding the funding to do it. We've been very fortunate to capture the interest of NOAA, US EPA, US Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Department of Environmental Protection, the Water Management District. All those financial partners, virtually cornucopia, they've all contributed to that outcome. We had very little property taxes to be able to use. But so the challenges were to find a way to lower the grade elevation of what was a farm field so that we could take advantage of bringing the tides into the property, and with it, the carrier of all the seed sources and all the nutrients and all the values that we have for, starting with a ground level habitat, building from that a nursery habitat for our important fisheries, and then the whole pyramid to follow. And we've been the belief that build it, they will come worked for mangroves. Believe me, we rarely planted a single mangrove out there. And the mangroves you see now, all brought in by Mother Nature. I might say that for folks that weren't following it from the very beginning, probably 95% of the water features you see there were made by us, connecting to the Manatee River or to Perico Bayou. The successes have been those, a tremendous rebirth of diversity, and the diversity at Perico did not happen all by itself. Damon Moore, and when he was working with us and the rangers that were there every week. We were pulling seed sources from Duet. At one point, possibly 60 to 70 different species of uplands. We spread them around like hay on the bottom of the manger, and the plants grew where they could. We constantly had to suppress exotics and worked it for over 4 or 5 years to get to the preserve that we have now. So it was a lot of intensive land management. And it was also a major earth moving exercise to move dirt around, get the water in, and establish circulation patterns that we needed. So great success in our original goal to recreate and restore the balances along our coastal zone with that property. And our challenges were finding the funding, and thank goodness it came through.
And then Bill had a question about is the county pursuing agrovoltaic using the solar fields for agriculture?
No. One of the solar fields is owned by Duke Energy. Florida Power and Light's got the largest solar field they have in Manatee County. There's not a lot of experiments in joint uses between solar and agriculture, just a few, but grazing hasn't worked. It's mainly a monoculture, and it's important. I mean, better than burning coal, but you gotta make sure you strike the right balance, because up and around the Florida Power Line Reservoir, when it was first brought in under a permit, 1972, the thinking was it's too close to the coast, too sensitive for have thermal discharges, and the EPA required FPL to put that plant inland and create a reservoir for cooling purposes and not impact the shore. That was back in 1972, 73. So that 9,000 acre reservoir was built atop of the county's most valuable agricultural soil and the landscapes around it. So the solar fields we see are covering up those same soil. Now you drive out Moccasin Wallace, State Road 62, those same soils are being covered up by houses and shopping centers, and no doubt. But our best agricultural soil was up there. And it's, by proximity, now generating power, importantly, for all of Southwest Florida.
Okay. Any other questions from the group? All right. Doesn't look like it. So Charlie, I want to thank you so much for doing this presentation for us and for all the service that you've done within Manatee County for the last 4 or 5 decades. It's really incredible. So I guess just the last question I have for you is when you look back at your career, is there one like crowning moment, a project or something that you're the most proud of through the work that you've done?
Just one.
We only have time for one. Yeah.
I can tell you the first one. I can tell you the first one. I was part of a team with Manatee County to stare down the Army Corps of Engineers who needed to widen and deepen the Tampa Ship Channel. And the disposal area they were going to use for 15 million cubic yards was going to be 9.5 miles offshore at the federal line off the north end of the Anna Maria Island. And it was a hard bottom habitat, not too much of that out there in the Gulf. And Manatee County worked to try to move that dump site, to a further distance. The Corps wouldn't have it. EPA said, well, it's up to the Corps, because we went to federal court in Tampa District Court and sued the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers. And Ann Gorsuch was the EPA administrator at the time. We won that case, and the Corps had to stop its plans. EPA had to commence a year and a half survey of the Gulf to find an alternative dump site, not 37 miles offshore, not 9, and to protect the hard bottom and live bottoms of the coast. And after that case I was testifying as to the public uses and the impacts on our environment at the time. We had partners from Fish and Wildlife, I mean, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, Moult Marine Laboratory, the FRMI lab up in St. Pete, all testifying as to the impacts. Local divers like Larry Borden were active in that. Stam Tate from Moult Marine Laboratory, all those people contributed to changing the destiny of that dump site. And it had an impact following that lawsuit that EPA went back and revised their ocean dumping review criteria for every site around the United States. That was 1984. And that was my first venture as the environmental guy in 1982, excuse me, in helping Manatee County make a go of it. And the most exciting thing for me right now is working with the wonderful people I have. We have 5 divisions, 5 division managers, each of them holding the same passion that I have. And we are in good hands. I got a couple more years here, not forever. I like to tell people I got a 10-year retirement plan. Anyway, that's what someone told me to use once. But it's not going to be forever. But the folks that are surrounding this energy, working for your county, in Manatee and Sarasota too, Risa and everybody down there, wonderful people, Sarah, all of them. We're a force. We're the cavalry, and I'm glad to be part of that, and to see the fruits of that operation.
That's
now
fantastic.
Here, last forever. As long as there's a government in Florida, we'll have these properties for our enjoyment.
That's great. And you're getting a bunch of thank yous in the chat too. Donna says, thank you, Charlie, for this fascinating and instructional presentation. We're blessed by your commitment to all the greater good. And Sandy says it's so interesting to learn about the process of acquiring land and maintaining environmental lands. And Tom Heitzman says, glad you're still doing what you do to make Manatee County a better place to live. So thank you so much, Charlie. Appreciate everything.
Thank you.
And then I do have some bits of just business for the chapter. So we are having a field trip this Saturday, the 17th. And it's going to be at one of these properties that Manatee County has recently acquired. It's called Triple Oak Preserve. It's so new that it doesn't actually have a address listed online. You can only get the address on our meetup, apparently, right? And one of the Manatee County's rangers, Jerry Miller, will be actually leading the field trip that day. There might be another person attending with him as well to help lead that. So that should be a really interesting field trip, and then you can see up close and personal the kind of lands that Manatee County is acquiring and the restoration process that goes into that. So that should be great. It is sold out right now, but if you'd like to join for that, feel free to join the waiting list on Meetup so you can be notified if a spot opens up. The other activities we have a Firefest event, which is coming up at Carlton Preserve. That's on January 24th. It's from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. And we have a booth there every year just to educate people about our chapter and native plants. And Kathy Page is going to be having a booth there, and she could really use the help of at least one other person to help her man that, set up and take down of the booth. So if you have interest in attending Firefest and volunteering, if you could reach out to Kathy or just email our chapter directly, and we'll be happy to help arrange that for you. And then our next meeting is in February. It'll be in person at Selby Gardens, and the topic will be native edible plants with Zach Zildjian, and that'll be on Monday, February 16th. Social hour starts at 6:30 at Selby Gardens, and then the actual meeting itself will start at 7 p.m. Like we did tonight, and that'll be hosted in person and both on Zoom. And then last bit of business is that our spring grant cycle is opened up. So we offer grants for nonprofits to put native plants into their landscape. We recently increased our cap to $1,000 per grant that people can apply for. And the grant cycle runs from January through April, I believe. So if you know anybody that's part of a nonprofit that could take advantage, please have them apply on our website. But other than that, that's all I have, unless anybody else had any announcements that they'd like to make. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your night, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.